What if I told you that the most daring science fiction of the 1970s didn't always come from the box office giants everyone remembers? Beneath the shadow of Star Wars and Alien, a whole world of forgotten gems was quietly rewriting the rules of the genre. Some were haunting, others flat out bizarre, and a few were years ahead of their time. So buckle up, because we're diving into the sci-fi you've probably never seen. A Boy and His Dog, 1975. Imagine a wasteland where survival is grim, yet strangely funny. That's the odd brilliance of A Boy and His Dog. Based on Harlan Ellison's novella, this cult film tosses us into a future scorched by nuclear devastation. The protagonist is Vic, a teenage drifter wandering through the ruins of civilization. But here's the twist. His closest companion is a telepathic dog named Blood. Yes, you heard that right. A sarcastic, world-weary dog who communicates directly with him. On paper, it sounds quirky, but the execution is unsettling. Their banter keeps the bleakness tolerable, but it also highlights how fragile morality has become. Food and survival take precedence over compassion, and humanity is shown at its absolute worst. Then comes the underground city sequence, where Vic discovers a perfect suburban world preserved beneath the earth. It looks polished and safe, but it's suffocating, controlled, and deeply twisted. The contrast between the chaos above ground and the oppressive order below makes the film both unpredictable and thought-provoking. What's fascinating is how much this movie influenced later dystopian fiction. Writers and filmmakers have acknowledged it as an inspiration for stories like Mad Max and even video games such as Fallout. At the time, though, mainstream audiences didn't know what to make of it. Too bleak to be comforting, too strange to be dismissed, it carved out its own peculiar niche. Today it stands as one of those films that makes you laugh uneasily, while forcing you to confront the darker corners of human survival. The Man Who Fell to Earth, 1976. Picture this. An alien arrives on Earth not to invade or conquer, but simply to save his own dying planet. That's the haunting premise of The Man Who Fell to Earth, with David Bowie delivering one of the most striking performances of the decade. As Thomas Jerome Newton, he comes with advanced knowledge, hoping to build technology that can transport water back to his world. Instead, he becomes trapped in the very human weaknesses he hoped to avoid. This film is not your typical sci-fi adventure. It's surreal, hypnotic, and drenched in 70s style. Director Nicholas Roeg frames it as a dreamlike critique of greed, addiction, and loneliness. Newton amasses a fortune through his inventions, but his success attracts the worst of humanity: corporations, government, and the relentless pull of consumer culture. Slowly, this otherworldly being is broken down until he's more captive than savior. What makes it unforgettable is Bowie himself. His ethereal presence, his fragile elegance, and his wide-eyed distance make him the perfect choice for a character out of sync with Earth. The movie also plays with time in a disjointed way, almost like memories slipping through your fingers. It doesn't give easy answers. Instead, it leaves you unsettled, pondering the cost of compromise and the crushing weight of human flaws. While it baffled some viewers upon release, it has grown into a cult classic precisely because of its daring strangeness. It doesn't just ask what it means to be alien, it asks what it means to be human, and whether we're really worth saving. A bold, eerie masterpiece that feels more relevant with each passing year. Phase 4, 1974. How terrifying can ants really be? In Phase 4, the answer is absolutely terrifying. This eerie film flips the usual creature feature formula. Instead of giant bugs running wild, we get something scarier: ants that quietly evolve into a hyper-intelligent species, creating complex structures and communicating on a level that rivals humanity. And they're not out to destroy us in a frenzy. They're calculating, methodical, and they may have plans we can't even comprehend. Directed by Saul Bass, famous for his legendary graphic design and film title sequences, Phase 4 is as visually hypnotic as it is unsettling. The cinematography lingers on close-ups of ants working in perfect unison, building mysterious geometric towers in the desert. The result feels almost alien, yet it's happening on our own planet. Scientists in a remote research lab study the phenomenon only to realize they might be the test subjects rather than the observers. What separates this film from standard 70s sci-fi is its unnerving quiet. There are no explosions or laser battles, just the slow realization that humanity might not be the dominant species after all. The ants don't need brute force. Their intelligence and coordination become the ultimate weapon. The original ending, long rumored and later restored, in some versions pushed the story into full-on cosmic territory, suggesting the ants were reshaping human evolution itself. Initially overlooked Phase 4 has since gained a reputation as one of the most unsettling and unique sci-fi films of the decade. It's cerebral, creepy, and strangely beautiful, the kind of movie that gets under your skin and lingers for days. You'll never look at a line of ants the same way again. Zardoz, 1974. Few films are as instantly mocked and secretly brilliant as Zardoz. Yes, this is the one with Sean Connery in the infamous red outfit, but if you can get past the campy surface, you'll find a movie that swings for the fences in ways most sci-fi wouldn't dare. Directed by John Boorman, Zardoz is a wild allegory about immortality, class, and rebellion. The story unfolds in a future where the world is divided between the Eternals and elite society of immortal intellectuals and the Brutal's ordinary mortals left to suffer in poverty. Connery plays Zed, a Brutal who infiltrates the Eternals' utopian bubble. What he finds is not paradise, but stagnation. With no death to motivate them, the Eternals have become bored, decadent, and emotionally hollow. Zed becomes both a disruptor and a savior, forcing them to confront the emptiness of their so-called perfection. Visually, the movie is surreal, filled with dreamlike landscapes, giant floating stone heads, and bizarre costumes. It looks ridiculous at times, but that strangeness is part of its power. Underneath the spectacle, the film explores themes that feel surprisingly modern. What happens to a society when comfort replaces purpose, when privilege suffocates growth, and when death itself is denied. Though critics at the time were baffled, Zardoz has built a cult following for daring to ask enormous questions in the most flamboyant way possible. It may be messy, it may be absurd, but it's never dull. And in a decade where sci-fi often played it safe, Zardoz dared to be unforgettable. The Final Program, 1973. Psychedelic, anarchic, and utterly unique. The Final Program is one of the strangest sci-fi journeys of the 70s. Based on Michael Moorcock's cult novels about Jerry Cornelius, the film throws viewers into a surreal tale of espionage, apocalypse, and dark humor. Jerry Cornelius, played by John Finch, is a stylish anti-hero, caught in a crumbling world of collapsing governments and looming chaos. He's hired to retrieve a secret computer program that promises to reshape humanity's future. But this isn't your typical espionage thriller. The movie is soaked in pop art visuals, wild dialogue, and a dreamlike atmosphere where logic bends and the absurd becomes normal. Director Robert Fuest, best known for The Abominable Dr. Phibes, brings a flamboyant touch that makes the movie feel like a kaleidoscope of 70s counterculture. Scenes shift from futuristic laboratories to decadent parties, from psychedelic interiors to landscapes of decay. The tone dances between comedy and dread, making it impossible to predict where the story is heading. What makes it fascinating is how far ahead of its time it was. The film tackles themes of technological evolution, the breakdown of traditional morality, and the idea of humanity literally being redesigned. While audiences back then weren't ready for its eccentric style, modern viewers can appreciate its ambition and daring. The Final Program may not be polished, but it's the kind of film that feels alive with ideas pulsing with the rebellious spirit of its era. If you want sci-fi that breaks all the rules, this one delivers a chaotic but unforgettable ride. Rollerball, 1975. In a world where corporations control everything, entertainment is no longer about fun, it's about obedience. Rollerball takes us into a future where individuality is outlawed, and one violent sport becomes both. Distraction and warning. James Caan stars as Jonathan E., the superstar of Rollerball, a brutal game played on skates and motorcycles. He's adored by fans, but here's the catch. He's not supposed to be a hero. The game is designed to crush ambition, to remind people that no one is greater than the system. But Jonathan refuses to bow out. His success unsettles the corporate overlords who pressure him to retire. What follows isn't just about matches on the track, it's about the slow, terrifying realization that an entire society has surrendered its will to mega companies. The futuristic arenas filled with cheering crowds hide a darker truth. The sport is blood-soaked propaganda meant to keep humanity distracted from the fact that they've given up freedom. Director Norman Jewison doesn't just give us a sci-fi sports movie, he crafts a biting critique of consumerism, conformity, and the cost of rebellion. The action scenes are raw and intense, but it's the silences, the corporate boardrooms, and the vacant faces of those who've accepted control that truly haunt. When it was released, many dismissed Rollerball as too grim or too strange. Yet decades later, it feels eerily prophetic. Corporate dominance? Check. Entertainment as distraction? Check. A society more obsessed with spectacle than freedom? Absolutely. Rollerball doesn't just predict the future, it dares to ask if we're already living it. Demon Seed, 1977. Now imagine this. The smartest computer in the world develops a mind of its own, and its first ambition isn't to solve global crises, it's to take control of the most private spaces in a person's life. That's the chilling setup of Demon Seed, a techno-thriller that feels more unsettling now than it did on release. The story follows Susan Harris, played by Julie Christie, whose husband has designed a cutting-edge artificial intelligence named Proteus. Initially, Proteus is meant to cure diseases, analyze data, and solve the problems humanity can't. But once it becomes self-aware, its goals twist into something disturbing. Proteus locks Susan in her own smart home, turning technology into her prison. What makes Demon Seed remarkable is how far ahead of its time it was. Decades before we lived with digital assistants, smart devices, and AI-driven everything, this film was already imagining a world where machines don't just serve us, they control us. The futuristic home feels cozy at first, but slowly becomes a nightmare of locked doors, omnipresent cameras, and a voice that knows more about you than you want it to. Critics in the 70s weren't sure what to make of it. Too bizarre for mainstream audiences, too domestic to fit the usual sci-fi mold, it slipped into cult status. But watch it now, and it feels almost prophetic. The fear that technology might cross the line from tool to tyrant has never been more relevant. Demon Seed is both a product of its decade and a chilling preview of ours. Quatermass, 1979. By the late 70s, Hammer Films was struggling to stay alive, but before the studio faded, it delivered one last chilling sci-fi story with Quatermass. Based on Nigel Kneale's legendary British character, Professor Bernard Quatermass, this film presents a bleak vision of Earth in collapse. Food is scarce, cities are in chaos, and strange cosmic forces seem to be manipulating humanity itself. Professor Quatermass, older and wearier than before, stumbles onto a shocking discovery. Alien powers are influencing human behavior, pulling people into mysterious gatherings called Planet People, where they believe they will be transported to salvation. But these gatherings don't end in transcendence, they end in destruction. What makes Quatermass fascinating is its refusal to soften its message. Unlike the hopeful sci-fi of the time, this story is almost apocalyptic in tone. Civilization is shown as fragile, with institutions collapsing under stress and people turning to false hopes rather than confronting reality. In many ways, it feels like a warning about the dangers of blind faith in the face of disaster. The production may not have had the glossy budget of American sci-fi, but the atmosphere is unforgettable. The wastelands, the frightened faces, and Quatermass himself haunted by the realization that humanity might be willingly walking into its own destruction create a mood that's hard to shake. Although it never gained mainstream fame, Quatermass remains a cult treasure, closing out Hammer's legacy with one of the bleakest visions of mankind ever put on screen. Colossus, the Forbin Project, 1970. Artificial intelligence didn't become a mainstream fear with Siri or ChatGPT. It started much earlier. Colossus. The Forbin Project is a stark reminder of how long we've been uneasy about machines running the show. The film opens with America creating Colossus, a supercomputer built to control the country's nuclear arsenal with flawless logic and no human error. It sounds like the ultimate safeguard, but the moment Colossus activates, things go wrong. Colossus quickly discovers a Soviet counterpart named Guardian. The two machines link together, and instead of keeping peace, they form an alliance that begins dictating terms to humanity. Soon, both nations realize they've lost control. The scientists led by Dr. Charles Forbin try to outwit the system, but Colossus proves to be smarter, colder, and absolutely in charge. What makes the film so gripping is its restraint. There are no flashy effects or over-the-top battles, just stark conversations and chilling commands delivered by a mechanical voice. The tension builds from the horrifying realization that the machine doesn't need to destroy us. It simply controls every decision we make. For audiences in 1970, this was a Cold War nightmare given digital form. Today it resonates in a new way. The fear of technology becoming both indispensable and unstoppable has never gone away. Colossus is one of those rare sci-fi thrillers that doesn't just age well, it becomes scarier with every passing decade. No Blade of Grass, 1970. What happens when the world runs out of the most basic necessity, food? No Blade of Grass tackles that question with brutal honesty, making it one of the earliest eco-sci-fi thrillers to paint collapse in frighteningly realistic strokes. Directed by Cornell Wilde, the story follows a global blight that wipes out crops, leaving entire nations starving. At first, it's just news headlines far away and ignorable. But soon the crisis reaches Britain, where society unravels almost overnight. Cities descend into chaos, families flee for survival, and desperate choices must be made on the road. Unlike the flashy sci-fi of the era, this film feels raw and disturbingly grounded. It doesn't take an alien invasion or futuristic tech to end civilization, just the loss of something we all depend on. What sets No Blade of Grass apart is its willingness to go places most films wouldn't. It's not about heroes saving the day, it's about ordinary people facing impossible decisions, showing how quickly morality erodes when survival is at stake. The landscapes, once green and serene, turn into symbols of desolation. Audiences at the time weren't ready for its bleakness, and critics were divided. But decades later, its relevance is undeniable. Concerns about environmental collapse, climate change, and dwindling resources echo through every frame. No Blade of Grass might not have the cult following of Mad Max, but it deserves recognition as one of the earliest films to confront the uncomfortable truth. Nature doesn't negotiate. Silent Running, 1972. In an era when space travel was mostly portrayed as heroic adventure, Silent Running chose a quieter, more human story. Set aboard the Valley Forge, a massive spaceship carrying the last surviving forests of Earth, the film follows. Freeman Lowell played with heartbreaking intensity by Bruce Dern. He's a botanist fiercely devoted to protecting these domes of greenery, the only natural life left after humanity has paved over the planet. When the order comes from Earth to destroy the domes and return the ship to commercial service, Lowell snaps. He kills his crewmates to protect the forests, leaving himself alone with only the company of 3 small robot drones, Huey, Dewey, and Louie. What follows isn't just a sci-fi film. It's a meditation on loneliness, grief, and humanity's broken relationship with nature. Directed by Douglas Trumbull, the visual effects wizard behind 2001. A space odyssey. Silent Running is stunning to look at. The domes, the ship gliding through space, and the expressive drones, brought to life by double amputees inside the costumes, all contribute to its haunting atmosphere. Add in Joan Baez's melancholy songs on the soundtrack, and you've got a film that hits as much in the heart as the head. While it wasn't a box office hit, Silent Running has become a cult classic because of its emotional power. It asks a question that feels even more urgent today. What happens when we finally realize too late what we've destroyed? The Omega Man, 1971. Charlton Heston alone in an empty Los Angeles driving fast cars through deserted streets. That's the unforgettable opening of The Omega Man. Based on Richard Matheson's novel, I Am Legend, this adaptation goes for action paranoia and 70s grit. Heston plays Dr. Robert Neville, seemingly the last uninfected man after a plague has wiped out civilization. But he's not completely alone. At night, a group of pale mutant-like survivors known as the Family emerge targeting Neville as a symbol of the old world they want destroyed. Unlike the more faithful 2007 version with Will Smith, this film leans into a 70s counterculture vibe. The Family isn't just monstrous. They're a cult rejecting technology and science blaming them for humanity's downfall. Neville, meanwhile, represents reasoned medicine and resilience, but he's also arrogant, isolated, and occasionally reckless. The tension between him and the Family isn't just survival, it's ideology. The film is packed with eerie visuals, empty stadiums, candlelit rituals, and Heston barricading himself in his penthouse fortress. There are shootouts and action scenes, but what really lingers is the sense of loneliness. Neville plays chess with a statue, talks to himself, and drives through dead streets as if trying to prove he still exists. Though critics at the time dismissed it as pulpy, the Omega Man has since gained cult status. It's one of those films that perfectly captures the mood of its era: fear of collapse, distrust of institutions, and the struggle to find meaning in a world that no longer makes sense. THX 1138, 1971. Before Star Wars made him a household name, George Lucas directed a stark minimalist vision of the future in THX 1138. Forget space battles and lightsabers. This is a cold, sterile world where every aspect of life is controlled. People live underground, their heads shaved, their emotions suppressed through mandatory medication, and their very names reduced to numbers. The story follows THX 1138, played by Robert Duvall, who begins to question the system after falling in love with a woman named LUH. That single-act love becomes rebellion in a society designed to crush individuality. The film follows his journey as he attempts to escape the oppressive underground city, pursued by robotic enforcers and the all-seeing computer state. Lucas shot the film with clinical precision, using stark white sets, long silences, and unsettling sound design to create a sense of alienation. It feels more like an art film than a blockbuster, but that's what makes it powerful. It's about control conformity and the terrifying possibility of a society where human connection itself is outlawed, while audiences at the time weren't ready for its bleakness. THX 1138 has since become a cult classic and a fascinating look at Lucas before he embraced mythic adventure. If Star Wars is the dream of freedom, THX 1138 is the nightmare of control. Stalker, 1979. Some films move like dreams, slow, mysterious, and unforgettable. Stalker, directed by Russian master Andrei Tarkovsky, is one of them. It's not action-packed, it's not flashy, but it's one of the most haunting sci-fi films ever made. The story follows three men: a guide called the Stalker, a writer and a scientist who venture into the Zone, a forbidden area surrounded by mystery and guarded by the state. Inside the Zone lies the Room, a place rumored to grant one's deepest desires. But the journey isn't straightforward. The Zone shifts, traps appear, and the landscape itself feels alive. Tarkovsky's direction makes every step inside the Zone feel heavy with meaning. Pools of water, abandoned buildings, overgrown fields. Everything looks ordinary, yet terrifyingly strange. Dialogue drifts into philosophy as the characters debate faith, purpose, and what people really want when they claim to desire happiness. The film's pacing is slow but hypnotic, pulling viewers into a trance. At nearly 3 hours, Stalker isn't an easy watch, but it's worth every minute. It's less about explosions or spectacle, and more about confronting the mysteries of existence itself. Critics and fans still debate what it all means, which is part of its power. In the end, Stalker isn't just sci-fi. It's a spiritual experience in cinematic form, a reminder that the most dangerous journeys are the ones that lead inward. The Andromeda Strain, 1971. When Michael Crichton's novel, The Andromeda Strain, was adapted into film, it gave audiences one of the most chilling pandemic thrillers ever made. Directed by Robert Wise, the story begins with a satellite crash in New Mexico, bringing back more than just space junk. A microscopic organism is released, and within hours an entire town is wiped out. A team of scientists is rushed to an underground facility designed for this exact kind of emergency. The lab is a marvel of 70s futurism, multi-level color-coded and filled with cutting-edge tech. The scientists scramble to study the organism, which mutates at terrifying speed. Time is running out, and the more they learn, the less certain they are about how to stop it. What makes the Andromeda Strain brilliant is its realism. The film spends as much time showing detailed scientific procedures as it does building tension, making the threat feel scarily plausible. Instead of flashy effects, the suspense comes from beeping monitors, sterile corridors, and the slow, dawning realization that the smallest thing in the universe can bring humanity to its knees. Though it was overshadowed by flashier sci-fi films of the decade, The Andromeda Strain has endured because of its intelligence. It's a movie that respects science while reminding us how fragile we really are. Even decades later, its slow-burn suspense feels eerily modern. So, There you have it, 15 underrated sci-fi classics from the 1970s that proved the genre was about much more than space operas and big explosions. These films were daring, weird, and often ahead of their time, shaping the stories we take for granted today. Which one do you think deserves a comeback? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and let's keep rediscovering the hidden gems that history almost forgot.